A rifle shot tore through the silence of Redemption Creek, turning every head on Main Street toward Sheriff Levi Abernathy as he stood unblinking, his smoking Colt still pointed at the sky. The year was 1878, and in this dusty corner of Montana territory, his word was law cold, unbending, and utterly devoid of sentiment. "That's enough," he called out, his voice carrying across the street to where two ranch hands were locked in a heated dispute. "Take your grievances elsewhere or spend the night in my jail." The men separated, muttering curses but knowing better than to challenge the sheriff. At 32, Levi had earned his reputation through unwavering consistency. Justice in Redemption Creek wasn't warm or forgiving. It was efficient, like the man who delivered it. "You didn't have to fire that shot," said Mayor Henderson, approaching from the barbershop. "Scares the decent folk." Levi holstered his weapon with practiced precision. "Decent folk appreciate order, Mayor. The day I start coddling troublemakers is the day this town falls apart." "There's a difference between keeping order and being heartless," Henderson replied, not for the first time. "Sometimes I wonder if you know the difference." Levi's face remained impassive beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He'd heard it all before the whispers about his cold demeanor, the rumors about why he never smiled, why he lived alone in the small room behind the jailhouse rather than building a proper home. The people of Redemption Creek had long ago decided their sheriff had no heart, and Levi saw no reason to correct them. "Good day, Mayor," he said, tipping his hat and continuing his patrol. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Levi completed his rounds. Redemption Creek had grown considerably in the 5 years since he'd pinned on the badge. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a proper main street with a general store, 2 saloons, a hotel, a small church, and even a schoolhouse. The railroad had changed everything, bringing settlers, commerce, and, inevitably, new kinds of trouble. As the sun began to set, Levi headed back toward the jailhouse. His steps slowed as he noticed a commotion outside Doc Miller's office. 3 women stood huddled together, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. One of them, Sarah from the hotel, spotted him and hurried over. "Sheriff, thank goodness. There's a woman who just arrived on the afternoon stage. She collapsed outside the station. Doc's seeing to her now, but she's asking for you." Levi frowned. "For me, specifically?" "Yes, sir. Said she came all this way to find you." A knot formed in Levi's stomach. In his experience, strangers seeking him out rarely brought good news. He nodded curtly to Sarah and strode toward the doctor's office, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle. The small waiting room fell silent as he entered. Doc Miller emerged from the back room, his spectacles perched on his nose and his expression grave. "She's awake, but weak," Doc said. "Name's Willow Grayson. Says she's come from Colorado." Colorado. Levi felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He hadn't set foot in Colorado territory for nearly 4 years, not since— "What does she want?" he asked, his voice betraying nothing. Doc Miller wiped his hands on a cloth. "Better let her tell you herself." "But Levi," he added, lowering his voice, "she's not alone." The door to the examination room felt unusually heavy as Levi pushed it open. The small space was dimly lit by an oil lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. On the narrow bed lay a woman whose face, though drawn with exhaustion, was achingly familiar. Willow Grayson looked up at him, her green eyes widening with recognition. She was thinner than he remembered, with dark circles beneath her eyes, and her once vibrant auburn hair now dull and hastily pinned back. But it was her the woman he'd known briefly in a different life. "Levi," she whispered, attempting to sit up. "Don't," he said, not moving closer. "Doc says you need rest." "I've been resting for days," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "I've been traveling for almost 2 weeks to find you." "Why?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended. Willow's gaze flickered to the corner of the room, where a small cradle sat that Levi hadn't noticed upon entering. With deliberate movements, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, wavering slightly before steadying herself. "Because of him," she said, moving to the cradle and carefully lifting a bundle wrapped in a faded blue blanket. Levi remained rooted to the spot as she approached, cradling the bundle with practiced ease. His mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. His name is James, Willow said softly. He's 3 months old. She paused, her eyes never leaving Levi's face. And he's your son. The world seemed to tilt beneath Levi's boots. A rushing sound filled his ears as he stared at the tiny face nestled in the blankets, a face with his mother's chin and what looked disturbingly like his own nose in miniature. That's not possible, he managed, taking a step back. We both know it is, Willow replied, her exhaustion momentarily replaced by determination. I wouldn't have come all this way if I wasn't certain. Memories Levi had long suppressed came flooding back those few weeks in Denver 4 winters ago. The unexpected connection he'd found with the spirited young woman who worked at the hotel where he'd stayed while hunting a fugitive. He'd been a different man then, or perhaps just pretending to be. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice hollow. Willow's expression hardened. I came because James deserves to know his father. I came because I thought you deserved to know your son. She swallowed hard. And because I have nowhere else to go. Before Levi could respond, the baby stirred, tiny fists emerging from the blanket as a thin wail filled the room. With practiced movements, Willow gently bounced him, murmuring soft reassurances. He's hungry, she explained. And we're both tired. I've said what I came to say. You can find us here tomorrow if you want to talk more. Her voice wavered slightly. Or you can pretend we never arrived. I hear that's what you're good at. The accusation stung more than it should have. Levi watched as she returned to the bed, settling herself against the pillows with the baby still cradled in her arms. He should say something, ask questions, demand proof, offer help, or simply walk away. Instead, he stood frozen, a man accustomed to clear choices suddenly lost in uncertainty. Doc Miller saved him by poking his head in. Sheriff, Mrs. Henderson says she can put the lady and her baby up at their place tonight. Says it'll be more comfortable than staying here. Levi nodded stiffly. Good, that's good. He turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway without looking back. I'll come by in the morning. He didn't wait for a response before striding out. Ignoring the curious glances from the women still gathered in the waiting room, the cool evening air did nothing to clear his head as he walked briskly to the jailhouse, his sanctuary from the complications of human connections. Inside, he mechanically checked on his only prisoner, a cowhand sleeping off too much whiskey, before retreating to his Spartan living quarters. Sitting heavily on his narrow bed, Levi removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. A son. He had a son. The notion was so foreign, it seemed to belong to someone else's life entirely. In the years since he'd left his family's ranch in Texas after the war, Levi had carefully constructed a life defined by its simplicity and lack of attachments. He'd seen what love and family had done to his father after his mother died, turned a strong man into a shadow, drinking himself to an early grave. Levi had sworn never to make himself vulnerable to that kind of pain. Yet now, a woman and a child threatened everything he'd built. Or, perhaps, a small voice whispered, they revealed how little he'd actually built at all. Sleep eluded him that night as his mind churned with memories of Willow, her laugh, her fierce intelligence, the way she'd looked at him as if she could see past the walls he'd carefully constructed. He'd left Denver without saying goodbye. Convincing himself it had been a brief entanglement, nothing more. He'd been a coward, and now that cowardice had a price. Morning came with no answers, only the certainty that he couldn't hide from this. After completing his morning duties with mechanical efficiency, Levi found himself standing outside the Henderson home, hat in hand, feeling more uncertain than he had facing armed outlaws. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with perpetually rosy cheeks, answered his knock with a knowing look. About time you showed up, she said, ushering him inside. They're in the back parlor. Poor thing was up half the night with that baby, but she insisted on being dressed and ready by 8. Stubborn one. She is. Levi followed her through the tidy house, noticing the family photographs and mementos that adorned every available surface, physical reminders of connections and history that his own dwelling conspicuously lacked. Willow sat in a rocking chair by the window, looking marginally better than she had the previous evening. Her hair was neatly arranged, and she wore a simple blue dress that Levi suspected belonged to Mrs. Henderson. The baby was awake in her arms, tiny hands grasping at the air. "Sheriff's here to see you, dear," Mrs. Henderson announced. "I'll bring some coffee and give you two some privacy." Once they were alone, the silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Willow spoke first. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I said I would," Levi replied, still standing awkwardly near the doorway. "You also said you'd write," she countered, though without real bitterness. People say many things they don't mean. Levi had no defense for that. Instead, he gestured toward the baby. "He looks healthy." A ghost of a smile touched Willow's lips. "He is. Strong, too. Would you like to hold him?" "I don't think," Levi began, but Willow was already standing, approaching him with the baby held out expectantly. "It's not difficult," she said. "Just support his head and hold him close." Before he could formulate another protest, Levi found himself with an armful of warm, squirming infant. The sensation was so foreign that for a moment he stood rigid, afraid to move lest he somehow damage this impossibly small human. James blinked up at him with unfocused eyes that nevertheless seemed to contain a universe of possibilities. Something shifted in Levi's chest, not dramatically, but like a door long rusted shut had been nudged ever so slightly ajar. "Why did you come here?" he asked, his voice rough as he carefully handed the baby back to Willow. "The truth." Willow settled back into the rocking chair, adjusting James against her shoulder. "After you left, I continued working at the hotel. When I realized I was expecting, I wrote to the address you'd given me, but never received a reply. I moved on from that place," Levi admitted. "Never got your letters?" She nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "I managed for a while on my own. The hotel owner was kind enough to let me keep working until I started showing too much. After James was born, I took in mending and laundry to make ends meet." She paused, absently stroking the baby's back. "Then, 3 weeks ago, our building burned down. We escaped with our lives and little else." Levi's stomach tightened. "I'm sorry to hear that." "I had a choice to make," Willow continued. "I could stay in Denver with nothing, or I could try to find you. A friend remembered you mentioning Redemption Creek, so I took what little money I had saved and bought 2 tickets on the stage." She met his gaze directly. "I'm not here to trap you or force you into anything, Levi. But James deserves a chance at a better life than I could give him alone, and I thought perhaps you'd want to know him." Mrs. Henderson returned with coffee and biscuits, her cheerful chatter filling the room as she fussed over the baby and asked Willow polite questions about her journey. Levi was grateful for the interruption, using the time to collect his thoughts. When they were alone again, he spoke carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" Willow straightened her shoulders. "I'm proposing to stay in Redemption Creek. At least for now. Mrs. Henderson says there's work to be had at the hotel, and Doc Miller mentioned the seamstress is looking for help." She took a deep breath. "As for us, for you and James, that's for you to decide. If you want no part of his life, say so now, and I won't trouble you further. But if there's any part of you that wants to know your son—" Her voice trailed off, the challenge clear in her eyes. Levi stood and walked to the window, looking out at the familiar street with unfamiliar eyes. The easy answer would be to deny responsibility, to send her away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. It would preserve the carefully ordered life he'd built. But as he turned back to see Willow cradling their son Levi found he couldn't form the words of rejection. "I need time," he said finally. It's not what I expected." "Life rarely is," Willow replied softly. "Take whatever time you need. We'll be staying with the Hendersons for a few days until I can find more permanent arrangements." Levi nodded stiffly, replacing his hat. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said, and this time it felt like a promise he couldn't break. The next several days passed in a blur of conflicting emotions for Levi. He performed his duties as sheriff with the same efficiency as always, but his mind was constantly pulled toward the Henderson house and its new occupants. Each evening, he found himself visiting, awkwardly holding James while Willow told him about the baby's short life, his birth during a spring thunderstorm, his first smile, the way he seemed to study everything with intense concentration. Redemption. Creek predictably buzzed with gossip about the mysterious woman and child who had appeared seeking the sheriff. Levi endured the sideways glances and suddenly interrupted conversations with stoic resignation, He neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, which only fueled further speculation. On the fourth day after Willow's arrival, Mayor Henderson stopped by the jailhouse, settling his substantial frame into the chair across from Levi's desk. "Folks are talking," he said without preamble. "Folks always talk," Levi replied, not looking up from his paperwork. "This time, they're talking about you bringing a woman and child into Ruth's house without so much as an explanation." The mayor leaned forward. "Now, Levi, what you do in your private life isn't my concern. But, as mayor, she came to find me because we knew each other in Colorado," Levi interrupted, finally meeting the older man's gaze. "The boy is mine. She lost everything in a fire and had nowhere else to go. That's the extent of it." Mayor Henderson's eyebrows rose in surprise, not at the confirmation of paternity, which the entire town had already surmised, but at Levi's willingness to acknowledge it. "Well then," he said, clearing his throat, "what do you intend to do about it?" It was the question Levi had been asking himself for days, with no clear answer in sight. "I'm still figuring that out." The mayor studied him for a moment. "You know, when Ruth and I first married, I was terrified of becoming a father, thought I'd be terrible at it. Then our Thomas came along, and somehow you just rise to meet what's needed." He stood, adjusting his vest. "For what it's worth, I think Miss Grayson seems a fine woman, and that boy of yours has your look about him." After the mayor left, Levi sat for a long time, turning over their conversation in his mind. He'd spent years cultivating his reputation as a man unmoved by sentiment, focused solely on maintaining order. The idea of suddenly becoming a father, of being responsible for not just a child's safety, but his happiness was more terrifying than facing down an armed gang. Yet each time he held James, each time those tiny fingers curled around one of his, something shifted inside him. And each time he spoke with Willow, each time he saw the quiet strength with which she faced her circumstances, he felt the walls he'd built around himself weaken just a little more. That evening, instead of heading to the Henderson house, Levi rode out of town to the small bluff overlooking Redemption Creek. The setting sun painted the scattered buildings in gold and shadow, making the town look almost like a mirage that might vanish with the dying light. He'd come to this spot often over the years, usually when he needed to clear his head after a difficult day. It was here, watching the town he'd sworn to protect, that Levi felt most certain of his purpose. But tonight, that certainty eluded him. A life with Willow and James would mean embracing everything he'd spent years avoiding: vulnerability, attachment, the risk of devastating loss. Yet the alternative, sending them away, continuing his solitary existence, suddenly seemed hollow in ways he couldn't ignore. By the time Levi rode back to town, the streets were quiet, most windows darkened for the night. He stabled his horse and walked slowly toward the Henderson house, where a single lamp still burned in the front parlor. To his surprise, Willow sat on the porch swing, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable in the faint light. "I thought you weren't coming tonight," she said as he climbed the steps. "I needed to think," Levi replied, remaining standing. "May I join you?" Willow nodded, shifting to make room on the swing. They sat in silence for a moment, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound. "James is finally sleeping through most of the night," Willow said. "Mrs. Henderson says it's a blessing." "You've made friends quickly," Levi observed. Willow smiled faintly. "People here have been kind, different from Denver, more—" She searched for the word, connected somehow. "It's a small town, everyone knows everyone's business. And yet no one seems to know much about you, despite you living here for years." There was no accusation in her tone, merely observation. Levi considered this. "I've kept to myself." Seems simpler that way. "Is that why you left Denver without saying goodbye?" Now there was a hint of the hurt she must have felt, quickly masked. "Partly," he admitted. "I convinced myself it was better that way. Cleaner." He turned to face her directly. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry for it." Surprise flickered across Willow's features. "Well," she said after a moment, "that's something I never expected to hear." "There's a lot happening I never expected," Levi replied, his voice low. "I've been thinking about what you said about James deserving to know his father, about what that means." Willow waited, her breath visibly held. I don't know how to be a father, Levi continued slowly. My own wasn't much of an example after my mother died, but I want to try. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I want you and James to stay in Redemption Creek, not just temporarily. I want to be part of his life, and yours, if you'll allow it. Allow it? Willow repeated, a note of disbelief in her voice. Levi, I came all this way hoping you'd say something like that. But I need to know, is this out of duty or because it's what you truly want? Both, he answered honestly. I have a responsibility to you and James, one I intend to honor. But it's more than that. He struggled to find the right words. These past few days, holding him, seeing you with him, it's made me question things I thought I was certain about. Such as whether being alone is really protecting me from anything worth protecting against. He reached for her hand tentatively. I can't promise I'll be good at this, but I can promise I'll try. Willow's fingers curled around his, warm and real. That's all any of us can do, she whispered. The following week brought significant changes to Levi's carefully ordered existence. With Mrs. Henderson's enthusiastic assistance, Willow secured a position at the hotel, working 3 days a week, while Mrs. Henderson, or the young wife of the general store owner, watched James. Levi, for his part, began the process of transforming the spare room in the jailhouse into a proper nursery, much to the amazement of Deputy Collins, who had worked alongside Levi for 2 years and had never seen him so much as rearrange his desk. Never figured you for the family type, Sheriff, Collins remarked as he helped carry in a small crib that the carpenter had crafted. Neither did I, Levi admitted, positioning the crib beside the single window. Life has a way of surprising you. Word spread quickly through Redemption Creek that Sheriff Abernathy was acknowledging his son and making provisions for the child's mother. Opinions varied. Some found it admirable that he was doing right by them, while others whispered about the impropriety of the arrangement. Levi was acutely aware of the gossip, but found, somewhat to his surprise, that he cared far less than he would have expected. His focus had narrowed to ensuring Willow and James were settled and provided for, a mission that consumed his thoughts in a way that left little room for concern about public opinion. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly James would work his way into the fabric of Levi's days. Each morning before his rounds, he would stop by the Henderson house to check on them. Each evening, he would return, often staying for supper and the ritual of putting James to bed. The baby, still too young to understand the complexities of their situation, nonetheless seemed to recognize Levi, greeting him with increasingly animated movements and sounds that Willow assured him were early attempts at communication. He likes the sound of your voice, she told Levi one evening, as he awkwardly attempted to feed James from a bottle, while Willow prepared for her morning shift at the hotel. Especially when you tell him about your day. I doubt he finds cattle disputes and drunk cowboys very interesting, Levi replied, marveling at the strength with which James gripped his finger. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, Willow explained, folding clean diapers. He's learning to connect with you. Connection. It was still a foreign concept to Levi, who had spent years deliberately avoiding deep ties to anyone or anything beyond his duty as sheriff. Yet here he was, night after night, recounting his day to an infant who couldn't possibly understand the words, but who watched him with such focused attention that Levi found himself speaking more freely than he ever had with another person. As the days passed, Levi began to recognize the small but significant ways his relationship with Willow was evolving. Their conversations, initially cautious and primarily centered on James, gradually expanded to include their respective pasts, their views on the rapidly changing Western territories, and their hopes for the future. Levi found himself sharing stories he hadn't recalled in years about his childhood in Texas, about the war that had changed him, about the aimless years that followed before he found purpose as a lawman. In turn, Willow told him about growing up as the daughter of a school teacher in Ohio, about losing her parents to influenza when she was 17, about making her way west in search of independence and opportunity. She spoke of Denver with fondness, but admitted she was beginning to see Redemption Creek as a place where she and James might truly belong. It's different here, she said one evening, as they walked slowly down Main Street, James bundled against her chest. In Denver, I was always just passing through. Even when I stayed in one place for years, here, it already feels more permanent. Levi understood. Despite his self-imposed isolation, Redemption Creek had become home to him in ways no other place had since he'd left Texas. Seeing it now through Willow's eyes, noticing her appreciation for the mountain views, her genuine interest in the town's history, her growing network of acquaintances made him value it in new ways. 3 weeks after Willow's arrival, Levi made a decision. The room at the jailhouse, while functional, was no place to raise a family. The notion struck him with unexpected clarity one morning as he watched Willow patiently rock James back to sleep after a restless night. They deserve better, a real home, stability, legitimacy. That afternoon, he visited the bank and withdrew a significant portion of his savings. Then he called on Harold Simmons, who owned several properties around town, including a small but sturdy house on the edge of Redemption Creek that had stood vacant since its previous occupant had moved to Oregon the previous fall. "You're looking to rent, Sheriff?" Simmons asked, surprised. "After all these years in that room behind the jail?" "Not rent," Levi replied. "Buy, if the price is fair." Simmons' eyebrows rose even higher. "Well, now this is unexpected. Would this have anything to do with the young lady and child staying with the Hendersons?" Levi met his gaze steadily. "It would." A slow smile spread across Simmons' weathered face. "Well then, I believe we can come to an arrangement that suits us both." The transaction was completed with remarkable speed, and by the week's end, Levi held the deed to a modest 2-bedroom house with a small yard and a view of the creek that gave the town its name. The house needed work, fresh paint, repairs to the porch, a thorough cleaning, but its bones were sound, and Levi found himself unexpectedly energized by the prospect of making it habitable. He hadn't yet told Willow about the purchase, wanting to have the house in better condition before presenting it as an option. But as he worked each evening after his duties were complete, sweeping out dust and replacing broken window panes, Levi found himself picturing Willow and James, in the spaces James crawling across the wooden floors, Willow cooking in the small kitchen, the three of them gathered around the hearth on cold winter evenings. These images no longer terrified him, as they once might have. Instead, they filled him with a cautious hope he scarcely recognized. On a crisp Saturday morning, nearly a month after Willow's arrival, Levi finished his early patrol and headed toward the Henderson house. It had become his habit to take James for a few hours on weekend mornings, allowing Willow time to herself, a luxury she insisted was more valuable than gold after weeks of constant caretaking. As he approached, he saw Willow already waiting on the porch, James bundled against the autumn chill. She smiled as he climbed the steps, a genuine warmth that still surprised him each time he witnessed it. "He's been waiting for you," she said, transferring James to Levi's arms. "Wouldn't settle for his breakfast until he heard your boots on the walk." Levi cradled James with the growing confidence of practice. "Is that right, James? Were you waiting for me?" He was rewarded with a gummy smile and a series of excited movements. "I thought you might take him to see the horses at the livery," Willow suggested. "Mr. Peterson says he's never too young to learn about horses." "Peterson's right about that," Levi agreed. "We'll start with looking, though. Riding lessons can wait a few years." He hesitated, then added, "Afterward, there's something I'd like to show you, if you're not too busy." Curiosity lit Willow's eyes. "Nothing pressing today? What did you have in mind?" "It's a surprise," Levi said, surprising himself as much as her. "I'll bring James back around noon, and we can go then?" Willow nodded, her expression a mixture of curiosity and pleasure. "I'll be ready." The morning passed pleasantly as Levi carried James through town, nodding to familiar faces and enduring the not-so-subtle glances that still followed him whenever he was seen with the baby. At the livery stable, old Peterson made a great show of introducing James to each horse, solemnly explaining their names and temperaments as if the infant could understand every word. "Fine boy you've got there, Sheriff," Peterson remarked as they prepared to leave. "Got your look about him, but I see his mama in that smile." Levi, who had been studying James's features with growing fascination over the past weeks, felt a surge of pride at the observation. "Thank you," he said simply. By noon, James was drowsy from the morning's excitement, his head heavy against Levi's shoulder as they returned to the Henderson house. Willow was waiting, dressed in her best skirt and a blouse Levi recognized as new, likely, purchased with her first wages from the hotel. Did he behave himself? She asked, taking James and pressing a kiss to his forehead. Like a gentleman, Levi assured her. Peterson says he has a natural affinity for horses. Willow laughed. At 3 months old, that seems ambitious. Peterson knows his horses, Levi said with mock seriousness, before allowing a small smile. And apparently, infants. After settling James with Mrs. Henderson, who shooed them away with cheerful insistence that they take their time, Levi and Willow set off through town. The day had warmed pleasantly, the aspens on the surrounding hillsides showing the first hints of gold that would soon transform them. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" Willow asked as they passed the church at the edge of town. "Not yet," Levi replied, surprisingly comfortable with the playful mystery. "It's not much further." They walked in companionable silence until they reached a bend in the road, where a narrow path branched off toward the creek. Levi guided Willow along this path, noting her curious glances as they approached a small clearing where the house stood, partially hidden by cottonwoods. "Whose place is this?" Willow asked as they drew closer. Levi took a deep breath. "Mine, ours, if you want it to be." Willow stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as she looked from the house to Levi and back again. "You bought a house?" "Last week," he confirmed, suddenly uncertain in the face of her surprise. "It needs work, but it's solid. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, room for James to grow." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Room for us, if that's what you want." "If that's what I want," Willow repeated, her voice catching. "Levi, are you asking—" "I'm asking if you'll marry me," he said, the words emerging with surprising ease. "Not out of duty or because it's expected, but because these past weeks have shown me what I was missing, all those years I kept everyone at arm's length." He took her hands in his. "I can't promise I'll be perfect at this. I'll probably make 1,000 mistakes, but I want to try with you, with James. I want us to be a family." Tears welled in Willow's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I came to Redemption Creek hoping you might acknowledge your son," she said softly. "I never dared hope for this." "Is that a yes?" Levi asked, his heart pounding in a way no gunfight had ever caused. "Yes," Willow whispered, rising on her toes to press her lips to their first kiss since Denver, but carrying the promise of countless more to come. "Yes, I'll marry you." Levi's arms encircled her, drawing her close as something long frozen within him continued to thaw. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, he gestured toward the house. "Would you like to see inside? It's not much yet, but—" "It's perfect," Willow interrupted, her eyes shining. "It's a beginning." The news of Sheriff Abernathy's engagement to Miss Grayson spread through Redemption Creek with remarkable speed, transforming the lingering whispers of scandal into expressions of congratulation and approval. Mayor Henderson, upon hearing the news, clapped Levi on the shoulder with such enthusiasm that he nearly knocked the normally stoic lawman off balance. "About time you settled down," the mayor declared. "Ruth is already planning the wedding reception. Says you two have been through enough and deserve a proper celebration." Levi, who had envisioned a simple ceremony with minimal fuss, found himself unexpectedly touched by the town's response. People who had previously regarded him with respectful distance now stopped him in the street to offer congratulations or ask about wedding plans. Several of the town's women made a point of calling on Willow, bringing gifts for the baby and offers of assistance with the house. The transformation of the small house became a community project of sorts. The carpenter who had built James's crib volunteered to repair the sagging porch steps. The blacksmith's wife, known for her skill with textiles, arrived one afternoon with curtains she had sewn for the front windows. Even Deputy Collins, usually so intimidated by Levi that he rarely spoke unless spoken to, offered to help paint the exterior on his day off. "Never seen anything like it," Levi remarked to Willow, as they sorted through a basket of preserves and kitchen linens that had appeared on their doorstep. "Half these people barely spoke to me before you arrived. Perhaps they were waiting for you to give them a reason," Willow suggested, holding up a jar of raspberry jam to the light. "You've kept everyone at a distance for so long, they probably thought that's how you wanted it." Levi considered this as he unpacked a set of hand-carved wooden spoons. "I did want it that way. Or thought I did." Willow set down the jam and moved to where he stood, her hand gentle on his arm. What changed? Levi's gaze met hers, steady and honest. You came back into my life. You put James in my arms. And suddenly all those reasons I had for keeping people away seemed insufficient. I'm glad, Willow said softly, because James deserves to grow up in a community that cares for him, and you deserve more than solitude. As the wedding day approached, Levi found himself caught between his instinctive desire for privacy and the undeniable warmth of the community's involvement. The ceremony itself would be small, just the closest neighbors and friends. With Doc Miller standing as Levi's best man and Sarah from the hotel serving as Willow's maid of honor. James would be there too, of course, though at 4 months old, he was unlikely to remember the occasion. The night before the wedding, Levi stood alone on the porch of what would soon be their family home, looking out at the creek glimmering in the moonlight. James was already asleep inside, having moved from the Henderson house earlier that week, though Willow was spending her last night as a single woman with Mrs. Henderson, in deference to tradition. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled Levi from his thoughts. He turned to see Mayor Henderson making his way up the path, a package tucked under one arm. "Thought I might find you here," the mayor said, climbing the steps with a slight grunt of effort. "Nervous?" "No," Levi answered automatically, then reconsidered. "Maybe a little, not about marrying Willow, but about everything that comes after." Mayor Henderson chuckled. "That's the trick of it? The wedding's just one day. It's all the days that follow that make a marriage." He held out the package. "Brought you something. Been saving it for a special occasion." Levi unwrapped the paper to reveal a bottle of fine Kentucky bourbon, a rare luxury in this part of the territory. "This is generous, Mayor. Call me Howard," the older man insisted. "We're well past formalities at this point." He gestured toward the porch chairs. "Care to share a drink with an old man on your last night of bachelorhood?" They settled into the chairs, and Howard produced 2 glasses from his coat pocket. As they sipped the bourbon in companionable silence, Levi found himself unusually at ease. The Mayor Howard had been one of the first to welcome him to Redemption Creek 5 years earlier, offering him the sheriff's position when the previous lawman had retired. Over the years, he had been a steady presence, offering guidance when asked, but mostly respecting Levi's preference for handling matters his own way. "You know," Howard said after a time, "when you first came to town, Ruth said you carried sadness like other men carry watches always there, always checking it, making sure it's still working." Levi raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Henderson has quite a way with words." "That she does," Howard agreed with a fond smile. "She also said, just last week, that she's never seen that sadness lighter than when you're with that boy of yours." He raised his glass slightly. "To new beginnings, Sheriff." Levi touched his glass to Howard's. "To new beginnings," he echoed, the words carrying more meaning than he could have imagined possible just a few months earlier. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Levi dressed with unusual care in a new suit, purchased specifically for the occasion, feeling strangely vulnerable without his badge and gun belt. Doc Miller arrived early, ostensibly to fulfill his duties as best man, but primarily, Levi suspected, to ensure the groom didn't succumb to last-minute nerves. "You're looking surprisingly calm," Doc observed as they walked together toward the church. "I half expected to find you pacing a hole in your floorboards." "No point in being nervous about something I'm certain of," Levi replied, realizing as he spoke that it was true. Whatever uncertainties he harbored about fatherhood, about his ability to be the man Willow and James deserved, he had no doubts about his decision to marry her. The small church was filled beyond capacity, with guests spilling onto the porch and peering through open windows. As Levi took his place at the altar, he scanned the assembled faces, people he had protected and served for years, but had never truly known. Today they looked at him not with the usual deference afforded to his badge, but with genuine happiness for the man behind it. When the door opened and Willow appeared, James in her arms and a simple crown of autumn flowers in her hair, Levi felt his breath catch. She wore a dress of soft blue, not the traditional white, but perfectly suited to her, practical, yet beautiful, just like the woman herself. As she walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his, Levi was struck by the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged simple vows, promising to honor and cherish each other, to raise James with love and wisdom, to build a life together founded on trust and mutual respect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers that erupted from the congregation startled James, who had been surprisingly quiet throughout the proceedings. His sudden wail of protest drew laughter from the guests and a smile from Levi, who gently took his son from Willow's arms. "It's all right," he murmured, holding the baby close. "Just people being happy for us." James quieted almost immediately, his small hand reaching up to pat Levi's cheek in a gesture that never failed to tighten his throat with emotion. Willow watched them, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. "Sheriff Abernathy," she said softly, using his title with gentle teasing, "I do believe you've developed a heart after all." Levi's answering smile was unreserved, a rare sight that caused several onlookers to exchange surprised glances. "Mrs. Abernathy," he replied, "I believe you might be right." The celebration that followed at the Henderson home was unlike anything Redemption Creek had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. A fiddler and banjo player provided lively music, and the newly expanded Abernathy family found themselves at the center of genuine community warmth. As the afternoon progressed, Levi found moments to observe Willow from across the room, watching her laugh with the other women, graciously accept congratulations, proudly introduce James to those who hadn't yet met him. The sight filled him with a contentment so profound it bordered on disbelief. This was his family now, his wife, his son. Words that had once seemed to belong to other men's lives were now central to his own. Deputy Collins approached, a glass of punch in hand, and his usual nervous expression somewhat softened by the festive atmosphere. "Congratulations, Sheriff. Mrs. Abernathy seems like a fine woman." "She is," Levi agreed, his eyes still following Willow across the room. "Better than I deserve, most likely." Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Don't know about that, sir. You've done right by this town for years, kept us safe. Maybe it's time life gave something back." The simple observation, coming from the normally reticent deputy, struck Levi with unexpected force. He had never viewed his work as sheriff in terms of deserving anything in return. It was a job, a duty one he performed to the best of his ability, because that was what was required. The notion that it might have earned him some measure of happiness, that the years of service might balance the scales against his past failures, was novel and strangely comforting. "Thank you, Collins," he said, clapping the younger man on the shoulder. "I appreciate that." As the celebration began to wind down, Howard Henderson called for attention, raising his glass for a toast. "To Sheriff and Mrs. Abernathy," he proclaimed, his voice carrying across the yard. "May your home be blessed with love, your family with health, and your lives with the joy you both deserve." The guests echoed the sentiment, glasses raised to the couple who stood together at the center of it all. Levi with James securely in one arm, his other hand resting lightly at Willow's waist, both of them slightly overwhelmed by the genuine affection surrounding them. Later, as they walked through the twilight toward their home, Willow leaned against Levi's side, her head resting against his shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I knew was possible," she replied, her voice rich with contentment. "Are you?" Levi considered the question seriously. As was his nature, the word happy had rarely been part of his vocabulary, seeming too simple, too vulnerable to describe any state worth pursuing. Yet now, with Willow beside him and James sleeping peacefully against his chest, he found it was the only word that fit. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." The early months of marriage brought adjustments for both Levi and Willow as they settled into life together. For Levi, who had lived alone for so many years, the constant presence of others in his space required a period of adaptation. The orderly quiet of his bachelor existence gave way to the wonderful chaos of family life. James's increasingly vocal demands, Willow's humming as she moved about the kitchen, the countless small sounds and movements that transformed a house into a home. Willow, too, found herself adapting to the rhythms of a small town after years in Denver, to partnership after long independence, to sharing the care of James with someone equally invested in his well-being. There were inevitable moments of friction as they learned each other's habits and preferences, but these were overshadowed by the growing strength of their connection. James thrived under their joint care, reaching milestones that filled both parents with disproportionate pride. His first successful roll from back to stomach was celebrated as though he had performed a feat of extraordinary skill. His first tooth was documented in a letter to Mrs. Henderson's sister in St. Louis, complete with a detailed description of the preceding nights of disrupted sleep. "He's growing so fast," Willow remarked one evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. James was asleep inside after an eventful day that had included his first attempt at solid food mashed carrots that had ended up more on his face than in his mouth. "Too fast," Levi agreed, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "Doc says he'll be crawling before we know it." Willow squeezed his fingers gently. "Are you happy with this life, Levi? Truly?" The question caught him by surprise. "Of course. Why would you ask that?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes I wonder if you miss your old freedom, the simplicity of answering only to yourself." Levi turned to face her fully, struck by the vulnerability in her usually confident expression. "Willow," he said seriously, "what I had before wasn't freedom, it was isolation. I mistook one for the other for a long time." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "This you, James, our home, this is what I want. Never doubt that." The sincerity in his voice dispelled her concerns, and she leaned against him, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder. "I love you," she whispered, words that had become easier for both of them to say with each passing day. "And I love you," he replied, the phrase no longer foreign on his tongue. As James approached his first birthday, Redemption Creek experienced one of its periodic bouts of trouble. A gang of cattle rustlers had been operating in the region, growing increasingly bold with each successful theft. When they targeted the Patterson Ranch just outside town, killing a young ranch hand in the process, the matter became Levi's direct concern. "I'll need to gather a posse," he told Willow as he prepared to leave. "Could be gone a few days, depending on their trail." Willow nodded, her face composed despite the worry in her eyes. "Be careful," she said, adjusting his collar with practiced hands. "James and I will be fine, but we need you to come back to us." Levi cupped her face gently. "I always will," he promised, sealing the words with a kiss before kneeling to say goodbye to James, who was practicing his newfound standing skills by holding on to the edge of a chair. "Take care of your mother while I'm gone," he told the boy seriously. James responded with an enthusiastic stream of near words, patting Levi's face with sticky hands. The pursuit of the rustlers took Levi and his hastily assembled posse deep into the surrounding mountains. The gang, more desperate and dangerous than he had initially assessed, put up significant resistance when cornered. In the ensuing gunfight, Levi took a bullet to his left shoulder, painful but not life-threatening. When the posse returned to Redemption Creek 4 days later, the rustlers in custody and the stolen cattle recovered. Willow was waiting anxiously on the porch of their home. The sight of Levi's arm in a makeshift sling caused her face to pale, but she maintained her composure as he dismounted carefully and made his way to her. "It's not serious," he assured her before she could ask. "Doc Miller can patch it up properly." "I should be angry with you for getting shot," Willow said, her voice wavering slightly as she helped him inside. "But I'm too relieved you're home." Later, after Doc had cleaned and properly bandaged the wound, declaring Levi lucky that the bullet had passed cleanly through muscle without hitting bone, the small family gathered in the living room. James, delighted by his father's return, was reluctant to sleep, crawling repeatedly to Levi, despite Willow's attempts to settle him. "He missed you," she explained, finally giving up and allowing the boy to climb carefully onto Levi's lap. "We both did." Levi, his good arm cradling his son, felt the familiar tightening in his chest that still surprised him after all these months, this fierce, protective love that had transformed him so completely. "I thought about you both every minute," he admitted, "even during the gunfight, especially then." He met Willow's eyes across the room. "I used to think having something to lose would make me hesitate, make me vulnerable. But it's the opposite. It made me more determined to end things quickly, to come home safely." Willow crossed to sit beside him, her hand gentle on his uninjured shoulder. "That's what love does," she said softly. "It doesn't weaken us. It gives us something worth fighting for." The weeks that followed brought healing not just for Levi's physical wound, but for the last lingering doubts either of them might have harbored about their shared future. As spring blossomed across the valley, James took his first unassisted steps, todding unsteadily from Willow to Levi, with an expression of triumphant determination that drew laughter and applause from both parents. On James's first birthday, they hosted a small celebration at their home. The Hendersons were there, of course, along with Doc Miller, Deputy Collins, and several other friends who had become important parts of their lives. As Willow presented James with a small cake, the assembled guests singing a somewhat off-key rendition of Happy Birthday, Levi found himself observing the scene with a sense of wonder. This was his life, now filled with laughter and friendship, centered around the remarkable woman who had braved so much to find him and the son who had changed everything. The stoic, solitary sheriff, who had once been known for his emotional detachment, now found himself fully engaged in the messiness and joy of family life. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and James had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Levi and Willow sat together on their porch swing, a habit that had become one of their favorite ways to end the day. "I was thinking," Willow said, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder, "about expanding the garden this summer, maybe adding some fruit trees along the back fence. Planning to stay a while?" "Then?" Levi asked, his tone lightly teasing. She smiled up at him. "I thought I might, if the sheriff has no objections." "The sheriff has none whatsoever," Levi assured her, drawing her closer. "In fact, he was thinking we might need to add a room to the house eventually." Willow sat up straighter, studying his face in the fading light. "Were you now? And why might that be?" Levi shrugged with deliberate casualness. "James will need his own proper room as he gets older, and if he were to have a brother or sister someday." He let the suggestion hang in the air between them. "Are you saying you want another child?" Willow asked, her voice soft with pleased surprise. "I'm saying I want everything with you," Levi answered honestly. "James taught me what I was missing all those years I kept my heart locked away. I don't want to miss anything else." Willow's smile was radiant as she leaned up to kiss him, her lips warm and familiar against his. "Well then, Sheriff Abernathy," she murmured, "we should probably start planning that addition sooner rather than later." Levi pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Willow, are you saying—" "I suspected last week," she confirmed, her eyes shining. "Doc confirmed it yesterday. We'll be welcoming another little Abernathy come winter." Joy, pure and uncomplicated, surged through Levi as he gathered his wife close. The man who had once been described as heartless now found his heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. As they sat together in the gathering twilight, planning for a future neither could have imagined 2 years earlier, Levi silently thanked whatever fate had brought Willow back into his life, had placed James in his arms, and in doing so had shown him that a heart once thought lost could not only be found, but could grow beyond all expectation. 5 years later. The Abernathy home at the edge of Redemption Creek was widely known as one of the happiest in town. James, now 6 and the spitting image of his father, had been joined by his sister Elizabeth, 4, and brother Thomas, 2. Levi continued to serve as sheriff, though he had gradually delegated more responsibility to Deputy Collins, allowing him to be home for supper most evenings and present for the important moments in his children's lives. Willow had established herself as an integral part of the community, serving on the school board and helping to establish a small lending library in the church basement. Her quiet strength and practical intelligence had earned her the respect of even the most traditional townspeople, and her home had become a gathering place for neighbors and friends. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Willow's watchful eye, Mayor Henderson stopped by to find Levi repairing a section of fence. "Quite the homestead you've built here," Howard remarked, leaning on his cane as he surveyed the thriving garden, the well-maintained house with its fresh coat of paint, the sound of children's laughter filling the air. "It's a work in progress," Levi replied, driving a nail home with one sure stroke of his hammer. Howard chuckled. "Aren't they all?" He watched as James demonstrated some complicated game to his younger siblings, his little face serious with responsibility. "Remember when you first came to town? Told me you weren't interested in putting down roots, said you preferred to keep moving." Levi smiled, setting down his hammer to wipe sweat from his brow. I remember. And now look at you 3 children, a fine wife, serving your 2nd term as elected sheriff, roots deep as an old oak. Best decision I never planned to make, Levi admitted, his eyes finding Willow across the yard. She looked up as if sensing his gaze, offering a smile that still, after all these years, caused his heart to quicken. Howard followed his gaze and nodded appreciatively. She's a remarkable woman, your Willow. Takes a special kind of strength to do what she did, traveling all that way with a baby, facing an uncertain welcome. I thank God every day that she did, Levi said quietly, that she had the courage I lacked. Later that night, with the children finally asleep and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Levi and Willow sat together on the porch swing that had witnessed so many of their important conversations over the years. The moon was full, casting silver light across the yard and the creek beyond. What were you and Howard talking about for so long? Willow asked, her fingers intertwined with his. The past. How different things turned out from what I expected. Levi turned to study her profile in the moonlight, still struck by her beauty after all their years together. Do you ever regret it? Coming to find me? Taking that risk? Willow's answer was immediate and certain. Never. Not for a single moment. She squeezed his hand gently. Even when you were at your most stubborn and withdrawn, I saw what was beneath the good man you tried so hard to hide. I'm not sure that man existed before you and James, Levi confessed. You didn't just find me, Willow. In many ways, you created me. She shook her head, smiling. No, I just helped you remember who you always were, beneath all that armor you thought you needed. She leaned against him, her familiar weight a comfort as the swing moved gently in the night air. I love you, Levi Abernathy. Every version of you, the stern sheriff, the devoted father, the man who still blushes when I kiss him in public. Levi laughed softly. And I love you, Willow Abernathy. More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow. As they sat together, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Levi reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. From the solitary lawman convinced that emotional detachment was strength, to the husband and father whose heart expanded daily with love for his family and community. It was a transformation he could never have imagined, yet one he would forever be grateful for. The sheriff who once was said to have no heart had found not only his heart, but his home, his purpose, and a joy deeper than he had believed possible. And it had all begun with a woman brave enough to place a baby in his arms and prove to him and to the world just how wrong that assessment had been.